Good evening and welcome to Jones & Company. I'm your host, Brian Jones, and today we have two very special guests joining us on the topic of food security. First off, we have Alan Butler, who's the chairman of Milo Butler Corporation. Thank you for coming on. And we have his cousin, Javon Butler, who is the chairman of Milo Butler and Sons Distributors. Thank you for coming on as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for inviting us.
Right, and so today, a very interesting topic in the sense that it touches everyone, right? Everyone's got to eat, right? And so we're very excited that you're able to join us, and I hope we get to cover a lot of ground. It's only 1 hour. We'll see how much we can cover.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
And so first of all, before we dive into this complicated issue of feeding ourselves, Alan, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your role in Milo Butler Corporation, and what the company actually does?
So Milo Butler Corporation would have been, so we're starting from the end, working backwards, more or less. And Milo Butler Corporation would have been formed in 2018, 2019 rather, and it was actually a split-off from the parent company, which would have been Milo B. Butler and Sons. It has three arms to it: Milo Butler Investments, so Milo Butler Investments, Milo Butler Distributors, which Javon is chairman of, and then Milo Butler Corporation, which encompasses all of them combined. So it's a mixture of all three of them as chairman. So I sit as chairman of Milo Butler Corporation. Prior to that, Milo Butler and Sons, which would have been the food distribution business, would have started out at least became incorporated in 1963. 1963, so this year marks our 59th anniversary, next year being our 60th, the same year that our country will be celebrating its 50th, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary as an incorporated company. Prior to that though, our grandfather, Javon and I mutually, so Milo Butler Sr., would have started food distribution and food store his business in 1928. So we're looking at a legacy of over 90 years almost of food distribution and other sorts within our country called the Bahamas. We're now third generation of individuals who are now running the business and doing all of these things. My experience would have started, I guess as a little tot, as a bagging boy working in the grocery store, trying to make a few dollars and so on, etc. So I would have started at age 7, but officially my aim in the business did not probably start until 1987. For a short stint, I went off to university, worked with a company in the United States for about 4 or 5 years, came back, did my master's degree and my MBA, and also have been working with the business ever since. So I have been, I guess, unbroken chain. I've been working with the company now. This year marks my 25th year, working with Milo B. Butler and Sons and watching food distributions all around. So I've had, I guess you could say, a wealth of experience both locally as well as abroad, having worked with a fairly large chain in the southeastern United States whilst I was there for after college and all the rest of it and so on. So it's indeed a pleasure to be able to be here and to be able to render that side of the business and be able to render what my contribution has been to trying to continue on the legacy, as well as being able to meet the needs of the Bahamian people at large.
Fantastic, yes, and so you made a tremendous contribution thus far with the company. It's going to be interesting to hear about some of your plans for the future. Well, before we get into that, Javon, so tell us a bit about the distribution side of the business that you're running. Yeah.
So the distribution side, as Alan mentioned, we've been in the business now for almost 100 years. And it is a family business. When I say it's a family business, we all would have spent some time in the business, from young lads working in various capacities. I actually grew up above one of the stores. So Alan's sister, I would go to the store after school and help out. On Saturdays, other family members would come and work the stores, particularly Alan's siblings. And, just being a part of that day to day. So for us, the weekend wasn't going to baseball practice or going to swim practice. It was going to work. And when you're young, of course, you want to do what all your other friends are doing. However, it helps to really develop a good work ethic. In terms of distribution itself, our footprint is that we are wholesalers, one of the main wholesalers in this country, with several agencies from throughout the world. We have agencies coming out of Asia, Europe, United States, as well as Latin America. From the retail standpoint, we have our location on Blue Hill Road that has been a staple in the Baintown community, Bain and Grantstown community for years. And lastly, we also have the liquor distribution, which is called the Flying Dutchman Liquor Stores, presently with a footprint of 3 stores, one in the east, one Blue Hill Road, and then one in the west. The Chief Executive Officer of Miley Butler Distributors is our cousin Damien Butler, and he, similar to Alan, is what I call a legacy employee. He has worked with the business since coming back from university, and I think he's now entering his 20th year?
Yes.
Entering his 20th year. So when we really look at the cornerstones of our day-to-day operation, you're looking at Damien as our CEO, Alan as Director of Retail, and our cousin Antoine, who is the operations manager for the company. So that's the family dynamic of the business.
Right.
I know there are a lot of individuals who feel like there are 300 butlers in the world working in this business, which is inaccurate. During the course of time, after G2 started passing away, we had to embrace external talent, skill set and expertise that exists here in the Bahamas. So our sales and marketing manager, our financial controller, other key components of the business are run by non-Butler family members, and they are as engaged in the business as we are. For us, it's different because we can have a conversation about business at any point in time during the day or night. Right. Whereas you have to learn to turn it off and turn it on because other individuals have their own families and their own responsibilities and their own concerns. However, to really have everyone engaged and to see how the times change, but the business continues to grow, how we keep looking for innovative ways to stay ahead of the curve. And in all honesty, the continuing conversation and dialogue amongst other agencies, other retailers, where we as Bahamians are now understanding that, hey, we no longer have to be the big fish in a small pond. You know, there are 8-9 billion people globally that we need to come together collectively and find a way to service that clientele. And I think that really leads into your topic of food security and what does that mean for the Bahamas.
Right, that's right. I mean, I like the way you painted the picture. As we can see, there's a lot of moving parts in the food. Well, basically looking at manufacturing and distribution. So you have a combination of what are we producing and how are we getting it to those who want to consume it.
Agreed.
Right? And so, I mean, one of the biggest concerns about the food sector is the bill that we pay, right? The import bill, that is, right? So basically, we know that there's a lot of complexities to it, but the fact is we're not producing enough, right? We're importing pretty much everything. So what is the current state of play there in terms of why are we importing so much and why are we not producing?
Well, I'd like to look at it from a holistic standpoint,
Sure.
the macro, and Alan really can look at it from the ground level and explain what's happening within the Bahamas, just from an international standpoint.
Sure.
Right now, unfortunately, there is an ongoing war in Eastern Europe. 40% of the wheat supply in the world is provided by those two countries. All right, was reading an article sometime last week, and it indicated that there are millions and millions of tons of grains that are just spoiling because they can't be shipped out of the Ukraine.
That's right.
Okay. It really started with the pandemic. With the pandemic, the world stopped. When the world stopped, of course, as a manufacturer, I'm going to scale down on the amount of items I produce because I have an operating cost to go along with those items.
Of course.
So everyone scaled down. People were home, people were not moving around as much as they used to. Consumer spending was not where it was. And then the world slowly started to reopen.
Yes.
So the demand increased. During the pandemic, you also had a uptick in e-commerce platforms, and a lot of individuals were ordering online. So that demand slowly increased, and as that demand increased, you then saw the manufacturers scattering to produce these products to ensure that they can ship them out. They had COVID issues within their factories where they're staffing now. They may have had to close a plant, may have had to close a location because they were under quarantine. So, of course, the supply slows down. Also, we found that the containers, there was a shortage of containers globally. Containers weren't getting into the port in a timely fashion, being returned to these manufacturers in a timely fashion. So now you started hearing the supply chain issues that the world faced.
Yes.
Now you walk into 2022, and we were trying to regularize those supply chain issues. Now you're dealing with inflation. America has already shown us that their inflationary rates have jumped astronomically. We're feeling it at the pump here in the Bahamas. We're feeling it through the shipping costs. When we look at what the cost of a container compared to 2-3 years ago, it's almost doubled. You're now looking at the cost of the insurance for that container, the fuel cost for that ship, and all of these throughputs are now factoring into what we're paying inside of the grocery store. So from a granular standpoint, that's what we're experiencing.
Right.
But here on the ground, I guess Alan can speak more to the food supply here in the Bahamas, and where do you see it going?
Well, as far as the food supply goes, I think all of those things you just mentioned, which has actually caused a somewhat of a halt or slowdown or break being applied to many of the consumers in terms of what they shop. But bear in mind now too, let's go back a step further. We look at a situation when we introduced this whole idea of no plastic bags being used due to us being eco-friendly and all the rest of it, which would have been even before much of the individuals who would have, before COVID and all the rest of it. With that also came, well, I guess even prior to that, you introduced taxes. You introduced VAT. In the introduction of VAT, you slowed down some of the spending right then, because there again now 10% was being added on to people's things. Here it is, many persons did not have the increase of 10% covered by their respective jobs, whatever have you, to be able to afford 10% more. So if an individual came into, say, my store, for instance, and they were given a voucher of some sort, whether it be a government voucher or a private voucher, they were only allowed to spend 10%. They were allowed to spend 90% of that voucher, because the other 10% of that voucher went to the government. All right, so there was no extra even being given in for that. So their purchasing power was diminished even from then. Then you add in this whole process of no plastic bags being issued. Now, persons now had to purchase these bags. If you went to the various food stores, wherever they would have been, they were now charging you for a bag that you would have to purchase. Because more often than not, most persons would not even remember now. This is a new culture you're now getting involved with. So persons actually reduced the amount of stuff that they actually bought, because I have no means of being able to tote this stuff out. So you're relying on boxes to be at the registers and all the rest of it. That further, and then came along COVID. COVID came along. When COVID came, people did not know how to treat it. And so what they ended up doing, they treated it like how they would treat a storm, a hurricane. So they all flocked to the stores trying to get in these long lines, because they figured now, hey, we need to get all of these things now because food is going to be in short supply. You would have heard various food distributors in the country who would have come on and said, oh, we have enough to last us for X amount of time and so on. And granted, we did at the time. And then after a while, we noticed that many of those things became not as readily available as they once were. Then some new things came on stream that we otherwise would not have spent a whole lot of time in. Things like hand sanitizers, disinfectants, and things of that nature. Things of which we don't even have the chemistry at all to even do here, or have not done here in the Bahamas at any great length of time. So you would have found that many of the wholesalers within the United States, where we would have gotten most of these type of items from, like aerosol sprays and sanitizers, they were saying, we have to protect our own first. Then we will send you whatever we have left. So despite the fact that we may be a small nation of less than 400,000 people, they were still treating us or putting us on the back burner. Because that was still, as far as they was concerned, considerable. So that started the process of slower movement and greater demands, raising the prices. Your typical economic storm, so to speak. Higher demand, increased prices. All right, and here it is, after fewer goods being offered in the market. So when they became available, you found you found a lot of other different brands. One we not have heard prior to COVID coming on stream. All right, and coming on stream in a big way to be able to see how they could best produce for the market and so on. Then, of course, after a while, after things began to roll on, we found that there was a food distribution where food supplies were being slowed down, because many of the factories in the United States, particularly where we would have gotten most of our food supplies, where they were finding that many of their people were infected with COVID. They don't know how to treat it. We're now suffering with well over 700,000 people who have died from this thing called COVID in the United States. And so therefore, we're going to tell these people, you cannot come to work. With those factories being closed on, particularly things like Tyson, where we got most of our poultry from, another pork industry, IBP, some of those major companies who would have produced large amounts of food, large amounts of things that we consume in the Bahamas, and the biggest two meats in the Bahamas consume is pork and chicken. All right? With that not being readily available as quickly as you would want it, therefore cause these demands to go up, prices to go up, and availability to also not be as readily available as quickly or as readily as they once were. All of these things sort of cause that sort of dynamic to occur. Then, after a while, things started to subside then comes along the war. And the war, as Javon would have alluded to, stated with all of the wheat supplies, bear in mind the wheat doesn't just necessarily just supply us with grains, but they also feed for these same animals that you need to have. So therefore the cost of producing an item like a chicken or a pig goes up tremendously. So you think of what you get from the pig. You get your pig feet, you get your pork chops, you get your spare ribs, you get your pig ears, and we use the whole pig here in the Bahamas, all right? You get your pork chop ends, you get your whole loins. You get all of these different things that we use typically in our meals. You get your sausages. All of those type of things have now become, I guess, impeded because of the fact of the war that is now in place. And then to compound the whole situation, you have a situation where you have difficulty with bringing in the product. So here it is now, where you may have had an increment, a small increment, increase from the manufacturer as far as the cost is concerned, you have an even bigger cost stretch with the shipping costs being going up, and no indication as to when it goes until it lands in the Bahamas. So you have no pre-knowledge of this happening until the product reaches you, and then you say, oh, the price just increased by 50%. Say, what? How could that have happened? And we're now having, as consumers, as wholesalers, as retailers, to absorb that. And unfortunately, we have to now pass it on. The one great break, I must say, of late, and I do thank the present government for doing, is somewhat of a levy in terms of being able to give us a bit of a breather in some of the taxations that we have. But here it is now, that in itself is coming. I don't want to be I'm ungrateful, but it is coming a bit late when you consider the Bahamian who has to consume on a daily basis, everyone who has to consume on a daily basis, when you've had VAT and the duties and all of these extra costs being added on a regular basis, and it makes it very, very difficult for the consumer now. Now there's some bit of a relief. Hopefully things will begin to look a little bit better, but even still with that, it's going to still pose a big of a problem for at least another 18 months or so.
Right. And so in considering that, I mean, the pandemic has really given us a rude awakening across the board.
Yes.
Many industries have found the need to incorporate new technologies and pivot and essentially rise to the occasion. What have you seen been done here locally in terms of basically improving our food security situation, whether it's on the farming, agricultural side, or anything else that can be done to really improve the security?
Well, backyard farming is actually increased by among a small group of people, but unfortunately, it has not garnered teeth yet, whereby, for instance, you, Mr. Jones, you've now producing enough sweet peppers, and I'm producing tomatoes. We're not bartering enough or doing enough to cause that change in our own neighborhoods yet. So we're producing some of these things, and then sometimes we have good product, sometimes we don't have good product, but not enough whereby we're causing a true change in our pocketbooks, or seeing those changes in our pocketbooks. So we're still relying on the food stores to be able to do. Now, what we've not seen happen is where enough has been done, where we've been able to pool these resources, say the likes of a Javon Butler, who has said, okay, I see Mr. Jones and I see Mr. Butler now has these different products. Let me see if I could bring these together, or bring them together, and get what they have, store it for them, and be able to distribute for those who are unable to get to them specifically. And so our distribution seems to be off in terms of how we bring these things to market, be it for the season, because here it is now, we grow everything in one season, and you growing tomatoes, and I'm growing tomatoes, and everybody's growing tomatoes, and so therefore we have this excess spoilage, excess amount, and it spoils, not being used to do anything else, like say for instance, making of tomato paste, making of ketchup, making of all these other things that tomatoes would be used for, other than just in its pure original form.
Right.
And so therefore we have all of this going on right now, and with all of our produce that has happened, we have not seen enough change happen within the market to cause this sort of thing to happen, the food security to really be done. And I hate to say it, but we tend to politicize our own food supply, which is something we ought not done. We ought to look at this and saying this is really an agenda that is national. It being national, no matter who is in power, should really take this very, very seriously and give it teeth. Giving it teeth by means of how we really go about tackling those individuals who happen to have the facilities to be able to store these products and to be able to get them to market on a continual and ongoing basis. To strategize how we're going to go about making this tomatoes available in January, in June, in September, and in December. By the whatever new technologies are made available. And there are some out there that we can actually adapt and begin to use. We've often been told on numerous occasions that we don't have the soil in which to do it. Well, I visited Israel in 2000, in the year 2000, and that's 22 years ago, and noticed that Israel has similar type of land base as we do, sand, and not really soil, but yet still, most of its export of its produce, which it produced, was going to Europe. Fancy that. It produced enough for itself and also enough to send to Europe on an ongoing basis. And I figured the Bahamas, in its climate and in its range, could do the same thing.
That's right. We certainly have enough land.
We surely have enough land.
It's not like our population
Absolutely.
is that
And so
tremendous.
therefore I think we have the archipelago that we live in to actually work to our advantage, but we're not using it sufficiently.
So my reality, coming out of fintech and being involved in fintech today, I see that transition from the digitization of creating that marketplace that is mentioned by Alan. And it's at its infancy. So there's a lot of backyard farming. There are individuals who, are presently just sharing their crops, their produce. Last week my neighbor gave me a handful of dillies that grew on his dilly tree. But creating that market end-to-end logistical supply chain is something that's being discussed, something that's being addressed. I see that there are several entities that are coming out of the ground where they are now looking to get into the space of being incubators for several farmers. We've seen successes with farms that are now located on Glaston Road where they're using the container models for farming, and everything now is the what do you call it? The hydroponics, thank you,
right.
The hydroponics. So small positive incremental steps. It's moving in that direction.
But the thing about it is, Javon, I hear you say that,
Yeah.
and I agree with you in as far as those small steps have been made. But those small steps have been made for the past 15 years.
Yeah.
We've now had 3 successive governments that have done and spoken about the same thing, and yet we have not gotten past base 1. Surely by now we should have been a whole lot further with it than we have been. Now I hope that this time around we actually give it some real wheels so it can actually roll and make it a going concern moving forward. But we have not really seen that.
What would you say is the main inhibitor for backyard farmers coming together, pooling resources, and getting them out for useful consumption?
Well, the backyard farmers have done what they've done out of pure desperation. Because of the fact that they've noticed that these prices are so high, they've now started, you know what, I need to do something. Their backs were against the wall. I don't have the monies going in. I'm unable to go to work as I once could have, because now, here it is now, my bosses have said to us, we're unable to come to work, and many of us aren't food distributors like such as myself, and so I work in a bank, or I work in an insurance company and so on. So let me find something else to do to utilize my time and my skills and utilize some skill set, even developing a new one. Let me try this farming situation and see how it works. And they had success. And with their successes, they then went ahead and it sort of began to share. And in their sharing, others got a hold of it and decided to do the same thing. And it was a wonderful thing to get started. Now, how do we continue it? How do we now pull these people together to cause that to happen? Because here it is, Gladstone Road has been running for quite some time now. How do we now get those people to market, to be able to get those products on our shelves in a regular grocery store, and to get them to sell their stuff on a regular basis, to put whatever the requirements are needed, so we don't just have products here in our stores, but we can also even begin to sell them internationally.
That's right.
And I think that those type of things are things we need to try to meet and make happen.
Yeah, I think when we come back from this break, we do need to explore how we're going to basically achieve scale, and then take it to the next level, right? In terms of exporting and taking some of our unique Bahamian cuisine and treasures to the world as well.
Exactly.
From a cultural engagement perspective. Right, so that first segment was brought to you by Milo Butler and Sons Distributors, as well as Agio Digital, and we'll be right back. Thank you.